hiding itself in the open.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when I was in college, they had a kid that got busted for marijuana. Marijuana was a big thing back then. I mean, you'd think it was Dillinger. And I wasn't into that sort of thing, but I had friends that were. And this one guy had one of these ceramic cans with a palm turned up, hanging on the wall in his living room. And he kept his marijuana rolled up in a plastic bag, sitting in that hand. Now, the police came in there, and they busted the place. It was a search warrant, and they tore his apartment up. And they never found any marijuana. And the whole time it's sitting there, wide open, but they couldn't see it because it wasn't hidden. Well, that's
an interesting story, yeah.
Like you said. Yeah, and we're doing the same thing. We're missing the obvious. But, you know, I was fixing to tell you about the dollar in my pocket. I got a dollar in my pocket that would have bought in 1923 when it was minted. It would have bought at least 10 loaves of bread, don't you figure? Dime a piece.
Yeah.
Well, now, you know, how many loaves of bread do you think that dollar will buy?
Oh, it won't buy hardly a half a loaf of bread. Maybe sometimes it'll buy 2/3 of a loaf, I think. I don't get to the store very often, but
I think it would buy 12 loaves probably, because I can take this dollar and exchange it, just like you could exchange it for Canadian dollars or pesos. I can exchange it for Federal Reserve note dollars, and I'm going to get $20 for it.
Oh, you're talking about going back to the, you know, I wasn't following it.
So
you're talking about this,
and then I can take that $20 and buy at least 10 loaves of bread.
Oh yeah, sure enough.
You could still, if you had a $20 gold piece.
Oh yeah.
In 1909, you could buy a fine suit of clothes, a pair of shoes, a couple extra ties, you know, maybe even a nice hat to go with it. Today, if you had a silver dollar, a $20 gold piece, you could buy probably 2 suits, nice suits of clothes for that.
It's about $900.
The dollar still is a dollar. You know, it's just that these Federal Reserve notes are scrip.
Yeah.
Did I ever tell you about going to cash my Federal Reserve notes in? Go to the Fed?
No, sir. I haven't heard the story. I'm sure that our listeners would love to hear it.
Well, I was up in Philadelphia. We've done one of those cruise attack mini stems that we do for folks, which we do, by the way, without charge. So anybody out there that wants to host one of these seminars should get in touch with us. But we were up there in Philadelphia, had one going, and I took 2 days off, first time in 3 years. And I even took Dee Dee up there with me, and we decided to go do some sightseeing. And we had an hour or 2 to kill. And I said, let's go have some fun. So we were at the Independence Hall, and we just walked that 2 blocks down to the Federal Reserve Bank. Well, I've got an old 20, and I've got an old 10. 364. And they own there, it says, this is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the U.S. Treasury or any Federal Reserve Bank. And at the bottom, it doesn't say just United States. It says, we'll pay to the bearer on demand $50.
Yeah.
Well, I got a 20 and I got a 10. Right?
Yeah, it's a lawful legal contract you got there.
Yes, it's a note. It's payable, due on demand.
Yep.
And in lawful money. It has to be lawful money. And which, you know, the Federal Reserve note isn't lawful money, or because it wouldn't say redeemable in lawful money if it was lawful money. So
I have a question.
I woke up there,
I have a question for you. So if you have a contract because you have a note and those people owe you something, that's an instrument. That note is an instrument of debt. So if the federal government isn't willing to uphold their part of the bargain and redeem the instrument of debt for real money, then when people in the sense of business borrow money from the credit department and the credit bureau, what makes that contract more binding than the note on the other, than that other note? Why is one contract more binding than the other when they both virtually represent the same exact terms?
It's not a question of whether it's binding. It's a question of whether it's honored. A deal is a deal.
Well, if we can't hold the Federal Reserve, Federal Reserve and the government, I like that word, reservement. If we can't hold the Federal Reserve and the government accountable, or actually make them pay us that for what they said they're going to, then why can creditors make us pay them?
Well, they could say that it's a different contract. That you've got contract with different people. Contracts can be breached, and they're breached every day. Contracts of all sorts are breached, and then the people under those contracts have to decide whether I'm going to continue under this breach of contract, whether I'm going to continue to do business with you.
Or am I going to take legal action against you?
Yeah.
I would love to see a group of people do almost what I did in Philadelphia, and then file a suit to enforce the agreement. Because what they have done is they've said, yes, it's an agreement, yes, we're obligated, but we don't do that anymore. And that's the end of this discussion. This guy even sent us, he said, well, I tell you what, you can take it over to the Mint. Because, whenever he wouldn't redeem them, Dee piped up and said, you mean to tell me you're dishonoring a note? And he said, we're not dishonoring it, just you have to redeem it somewhere else. And they came up with the idea, I know, you could go over to the Mint. Well, the Federal Mint's just one block over. It's a huge building in Philadelphia. And I said, no, we can't go over there because although they have silver dollars, they would only give me one silver dollar for this $30 in notes. And Dee pipes up and says, you mean to tell me that the government's thinks so little of your promissory notes that they'll only pay 3 cents on them, $1 for them? The guy looked like he was wanting to find a place to hide. It was hilarious. He was being a good sport about it. But it was still, what could he do? So I told him, I said, well, she said, isn't this our Federal Reserve? He says, well, it's the Federal Reserve, but it's not our Federal Reserve. He said, it doesn't belong to the federal government. It's not part of the federal government. I said, well, I thank you for being honest about that. I said, but at least make her feel good. Let her know that at least the controlling interest is all owned by Americans. And he looked at me like I had just spit on his mama. And so he shrugged and wouldn't answer. And I said, okay, well then tell her the truth. Tell her that half of the owners of the controlling interest are foreigners who hate this country. And he looked over one shoulder, looked back over the other shoulder, looked at her and nodded.
Yeah.
He was sick. So I realized somebody was standing behind me waiting, and I said, oh, here I am having fun, and they got business to do. So I stepped aside, and as I was walking away, I heard this woman that was standing behind us say, where can I trade these in for gold and silver?
Oh, how funny. That's awesome, Tom. You are inciting a riot right there.
Well, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, that's right.
That's like sex and politics. If it ain't dirty, you ain't doing it right.
Yeah.
Ooh, baby.
There was a fellow, Justice Stephen Johnson Field. He was one of the longest surviving members of the Supreme Court. He served almost longer than anybody, I believe. And
he wrote some excellent stuff.